Good morning, students. Welcome to our first online class since the commencement of the coronavirus pandemic. I hope you are staying safe at home, and I hope you are observing all the observables as recommended by the health institutions. Maintain social distancing, use hand sanitizers, wash your hands regularly, keep staying at home. Coronavirus is real. I look forward to meeting all of us when the school resumes. Everybody must be present. So stay safe. Now, this is a continuation of our lectures from where we stopped in the class. It is from the course content of educational planning, EDM 904. We have examined the approaches to educational planning, several approaches to educational planning. In this lecture, we will be examining the educational planning process. The educational planning process. Educational planning is not a one-slot idea or a straitjacket activity. Educational planning involves a lot of activities or a lot of tasks. When all of them put together, we call them the educational planning activity. It involves a process. It involves some process. And what is a process? A process is a set of interrelated activities that follows a sequential order. A process is an interrelated activity that follows a sequential order in attaining the objectives for which that process is meant to achieve. Like we discussed in class, educational planning has to do with deciding ahead of time the future course of action that will be taken in order to achieve a predetermined objective or goal. That's the subject matter of educational planning. It has to do with deciding ahead of time the future course of action to be taken in order to achieve a predetermined educational objectives, most rationally. Then, if that is the case, what then are the processes involved in the planning? What then are the processes involved in the planning? That is the subject matter of our discussion today. That's the subject matter of our discussion today. Educational planning, like I said, involves interrelated activities that take place at one stage or the other. And it involves a whole lot of people. There's no one person that can give us an educational plan or that can be involved in educational planning. It involves a set of people that are involved in different activities at different times. All such activities put together now brings up what we call educational plan. And then for all that to happen, it follows sequential order. It follows sequential order, what is known as the educational planning process. The educational planning process. Now, this process involves some defined tasks that are operationally linked and systematically carried out for the purpose of achieving educational goals. The process involves some defined tasks that are operationally linked and systematically carried out for the purpose of achieving the educational needs and aspirations of a country or a society. Now, the process in educational planning begins by asking certain fundamental questions. The whole process in the educational planning process begins by asking certain fundamental questions that guides the action of the educational planners. The process begins by asking certain fundamental questions that guide the action of the educational planner in the process of planning. The first question that arises in the planning process is, where do we want to be? The first question is, where are we? Where are we? Educationally, where are we? So in the planning process, the educational planner begins by asking fundamental questions that guides his planning activities. And that first question is, where are we educationally? The second question is, where do we want to be educationally? Where do we want to be educationally? The third question is, how do we get there? How do we get to where we want to be educationally? And then the fourth question, how do we know if we have gotten there? How do we know if we have gotten to where we want to be educationally? These are the fundamental questions or the guiding principles which guide the action of the educational planner. So in trying to answer these questions, the process of planning begins. The process of planning begins. Now, this process of educational planning have different stages, and different scholars try to designate different stages or different steps that are involved in the planning process. However, there are no hook, line, and sinker procedure or task. So some scholars combine one or two tasks together. Some separate them. But in all of the stages are found to be in the planning process. They are all found to be in the planning process, no matter how they are designated. Some give it different names, some give it different this thing. But in all of them put together, outlines the procedures that are followed in the planning process. Now, what are those procedures? What are those procedures? The procedures, no matter the names given to it, they all achieve the same purpose. The procedures and process include the following. 1. Environmental diagnosis. The first step in the educational planning process is what is called environmental diagnosis. Environmental diagnosis. The second step is called policy formulation. The second step in the planning process is called policy formulation. The third is program generation and rationalization. Program generation and rationalization. The fourth, program choice and implementation. Program choice and implementation. And then the fifth, program evaluation and regeneration. Program evaluation and regeneration. So basically, there are 5 processes or procedures in the educational planning process. Basically, there are 5 procedures or processes in the educational planning process. They include, as I mentioned earlier, 1. Environmental diagnosis. Environmental diagnosis. 2. Policy formulation and goal determination. Policy formulation and goal determination. 3. Program generation and rationalization. 4. Program choice and implementation. 5. Program evaluation and regeneration. Program evaluation and regeneration. Now we'll begin with the first, environmental diagnosis. The very first question in the planning process, where are we, is answered here. The question of where are we is answered here. Environmental diagnosis determines the direction and magnitude of the result of the education we want. The major activity involved here is an examination of the situation on ground. Where are we? Where are we? It's just like somebody going to the hospital for medical treatment. The first thing the medical practitioners will do is to diagnose the state of health of the individual concerned. By doing that, they conduct tests to find out the extent of illness. So here in diagnosis, we carry out similar tests and educational situation in the country to know where we are. What have we been able to do with the education system in the country? What has education been able to achieve for us? What education is achieving for us now? Is it relevant? So the first question of where are we is answered here. Most scholars call this stage, they call it pre-planning stage, environmental scanning, environmental analysis, or educational sector analysis. It's the same thing. So if you pick up textbooks and you hear pre-planning stage, environmental scanning, environmental analysis, and educational sector analysis, they are the same thing. It's the same thing as situation analysis in educational planning. They are all the same activities. Now, the major activity here is the critical and comprehensive assessment of the existing situation on ground as it concerns education vis-a-vis the needs of the society. A critical analysis of the nature of education that is on ground vis-a-vis the needs of the society. The education we have now, is it able to satisfy our needs? Is it able to meet up with our aspirations? That is the beginning point of the planning process. The education we are offering our citizens, is it able to satisfy their needs, their individual needs, and then the society's need? That's the very point of call in the educational planning process. Now, using this diagnostic approach, if you examine the situation of education in Nigeria now, you see a lot of loopholes, a lot of problems, a lot of lapses. First, the education we have in Nigeria today, is it able to satisfy the individual needs with regards to education? Is education able to give us a skill that will enable us to survive in society? Is education able to give us employment? That's at the individual level. Is education able to inculcate the values that we need to function as effective members of the society? At the national level or at the general societal level, is education able to bring about development in economy, in politics, in technology, and what have you? So this is the very first step in the planning process, to determine whether education is able to achieve what it's supposed to achieve for the society. Where are we in terms of educational provision? Where are we? Is education able to achieve for us all the goals we want it to achieve in all the sectors of the economy? So that step is called diagnosis. So it tries to look at areas such as the demographic trends. Demography here has to do with population. What is our population? What is population distribution? What is the various ages in the population? How can we take care of them educationally? What is the literacy rate in our country? How do we use education to solve this problem? How do we use education to address the peculiar nature of each population area? In Nigeria, you know, we have over 250 ethnic groups with different languages and different cultural backgrounds. How can we use education to address their cultural problems? How can we use education to integrate? You know, all the problems we have in Nigeria today can be addressed using education. And at the point of diagnosis, what we do there is to see how we can use education to address those problems. So first, we look at the demography, the geographical spread, the population growth. We must be able to know what is the population growth of the citizens, so that we'll be able to plan education for them. What is the population of the youths? What is the population of the elderly? What is the fecundity rate, the rate of childbirth? They enable us to know how to plan for the different types of education. So that is what is done at the first stage of the planning. We also consider the economic system. What is the economic system in vogue? In Nigeria, we have the capitalist system. How do we plan education so that it will be able to project the system we want? How do we plan education so that it will be able to sustain the economic system? How do we plan education in such a way that education should be able to solve our economic problems? All that are done at this stage of educational planning process. Then the socio-cultural milieu of the society. The social and cultural background of society is captured here. What are the various cultural background that education need to address? What are the social problems that the education need to tackle? All these are done at the diagnostic level. And then when we get the level of sickness in all these areas, like the medical doctors will do, they will be able to know to prescribe the drugs to be given. We'll be able to prescribe the type of education, the type of values that we will inculcate using education to be able to address the diagnosed problem. Education here at the diagnostic level is also used to address issues of language, issues of diversity, issues of minority, and then issues of labor market, the labor market requirements. We should be able to plan education in such a way that the labor demands in the labor market are taken care of at each point in time, not producing citizens who go into the labor market and they cannot be absorbed. That's wrong type of planning. So at the diagnostic level takes care of all this, so that we know the number of people that are being produced, the sector that are needed, and the sector that need the different levels of manpower, and make sure that this manpower are supplied at each point in time that they are needed for economic progress. The activities of the environmental diagnosis involve major stakeholders. It's not one individual person's activity. At the point of diagnosis, several stakeholders are involved, not just one person. Those stakeholders that are involved and should be involved in diagnostic activities include teachers, parents, the government, employers of labor, donor agencies, community leaders, and educational administrators. Each of these categories of stakeholders have significant input to make in the educational planning process, because they have interests in education, and therefore those interests must be harmonized and taken care of in the planning process. So that is why the activity also involves them. Now, how do we achieve the process? How do we achieve this process? This process can be achieved through the following means: by forums like seminar, workshops, education summits, conferences, and town hall meetings. Town hall meetings. To carry out a diagnosis of education, the various activities will involve the stakeholders, as I mentioned, and the activities that will enable us get the necessary and relevant information concerning education is activities like seminar, workshops, education summits, conferences, and town hall meetings, and several other activities that will enable us get the relevant data and information concerning what we want to do with our education system. These stakeholders are expected to supply information. They are expected to supply information on what they consider to be the educational needs and aspirations of the society as it affects their interests. They give the necessary information that is required as it concerns the societal needs and aspirations as it affects their interests. So that is why their input in the planning process is very important. So when these inputs are made, how does it help in the planning process? It helps in the policy planning process. It helps in the next stage that we're about to enter, that has to do with the policy formulation. All these inputs are gathered and put together and are articulated and then used to formulate the policy for the country. Now, the environmental diagnosis must be comprehensive enough to cover all levels and types of education. It must be comprehensive enough to cover all levels and types of education, including even the kindergarten, the early childhood stage, the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary. It's not just there. Both the formal and non-formal aspect of education should also include even the adult and non-formal education programs. It is because the non-formal aspect of the education in Nigeria is not properly captured or addressed that we have most of the problem we have today. Most of the people that empty themselves into the university system are not supposed to be there. The other sectors are supposed to have taken care of all that. But much emphasis here in Nigeria is not placed in that area. But you will recall that that non-formal sector has even been the area that has sustained the economy. The average Nigerian today fixes his car at the mechanic workshop. The average Nigerian today, the furniture we use at home are done by the roadside furniture makers. So that aspect of education is the non-formal and should also be emphasized in the planning process. So the diagnosis also ought to consider all the aspects of education, not just what happens in the school, but even outside the school. They are also articulated, because not everybody will go to the university. Most people terminate at the secondary school level. After that, they should also be engaged in other forms of education that will enable them acquire skills that will help society and help the individual. All right. So that's the activities of the activities of the first stage in educational planning, called the diagnostic dimension or diagnostic. Then the next step, the next stage in the educational planning process is policy formulation. Policy formulation. Policy formulation. A policy is a general guideline that gives direction for specific course of action to be taken to achieve a goal, a given goal. It could be political, it could be economic, it could be educational, and what have you. So policy is a general guideline. So in education, policy formulation in education provides the general guideline towards achievement of educational goals. The guidelines or the roadmap that leads towards the attainment of educational goal. So the diagnosis done is just like when the medical doctor examines the sick patient through diagnosis. Those diagnosis test is considered. Now the test result will indicate the level of malaria parasite. Now based on the level of malaria parasite as provided by the test result, diagnostic result, the medical doctor now makes prescription based on the identified disease. Now here in educational planning process, the policy making process is based on the diagnostic result of the educational planning process. Here, what the identified problems in education are addressed through the process of policy making. Now the medical doctor will prescribe drugs based on the result. Now you have malaria plus plus or 1 plus or plus plus plus. Based on this is the drug you will take. Take this 3 times daily, take this 1 times daily, take this once daily, and all that. And you take it for 5 days. And when that is done, the problem is solved. That is the same thing educational policy does. Educational policy is based on the problem areas identified within the education system, and policy is made in line with that. Policy is a type of recommendation on the steps to be taken to improve the educational system, to achieve what the society wants education to achieve for it, otherwise known as the goals of education or the aspirations of the society. So the outcome of the environmental diagnosis provide the necessary platform for policy formulation and goal setting in education. So policy formulation and goal determination is the statutory responsibility of which people? The political class. The political class. Those who are in charge of authority, those who are in government. the government institution, they determine the policy process after the diagnosis. So policies are formulated through legislative procedures. After which there is what is called executive assent, and then it becomes a legal document. So policy making is done by the political class through legislative procedures. After legislative procedures, there is executive assent, which makes it becomes a legal document. And when it becomes a legal document, it becomes the basis upon which education is implemented. So educational policies therefore can be said to be legal instruments that defines the goals and provide guidelines for educational activities and practice. It provides roadmap for educational program and projects. So the entire thing we do in education has already been defined and provided in the education policy. It gives us direction. It's otherwise called the roadmap that directs our actions in all that we do. So as a matter of fact, what I'm doing right here has already been provided for through the educational policy. So what I'm doing here now is trying to implement what is already laid down in the planning, in the policy. So policy is a guide, and like I said earlier, diagnosis is done across all levels of education. So at the point of policy, policy is also made along all lines of education: primary, secondary, tertiary, non-formal. All aspects of education is covered in the policy. What happens here is that all the areas that are diagnosed are looked into and considered and taken care of in the policy formulation process. So policy formulation provides the necessary platform for determining the strategies to be adopted to achieve defined educational goals. Policy formulation provides the necessary platform to determine the strategies to be adopted. It helps to determine the strategy that will be adopted to achieve defined educational goals. It helps to determine the strategy to be adopted in achieving defined educational goals most reasonably. It is the policy, educational policy, that answers the question, how do we get there? That was asked earlier at the beginning point. The question of how do we get there is determined by the policy. It is the policy that directs, that gives direction on where we are going. It is the road we follow to the end of where we are going. So the policy is like the vehicle that takes us through the road to the end of where we want to be. So that question of how do we get there is answered through policy formulation. So the basic activity of policy formulation is to articulate all those areas as diagnosed in the diagnostic stage, and then all of them, what they consider to be good and relevant, are put into the policy, and then before implementation. That brings us to the next stage and the planning process called program generation and rationalization. Program generation and rationalization. After the policy has been formulated, this stage now is left in the hands of the professionals. So say program generation and rationalization is the professional responsibility of technical planners in education. Here it is the technical planners that take over at this stage, and then the task here involves the following activities. Now remember that the national policy sets goals to be achieved, either in primary, secondary, non-formal, tertiary, and all that. The goals are all set there. If you pick a copy of the national policy in Nigeria, you'll see all those things are clearly set there. So what does the technical advisors do here? What is their responsibility? One, they do what is called technical analysis of the broad goals of education. as enunciated in the national policy. They do what is called technical analysis. Here, they will be able to break them down into pieces and be able to examine all the goals set, and then do what we call looking at the various alternatives. Looking at the various alternatives with a view to making choice among these various alternatives, course of actions. Remember, planning involves deciding ahead of time the future course of action to be taken. It is here that future course of action is taken against all the goals set. Which one is more important? Which one should we focus on? Which one do we have to adopt? Which one do we have to, it is here that the technical advisors, technical planners will have to do their job. Two, they determine the different programs through which the goals will be achieved. So after the analysis and after looking at all the options, they now make choice, determine the different programs through which the goals will be achieved most rationally. What are the programs that we have to embark on to achieve this goal? What program do we have to embark on to achieve this goal? What program is most important to achieve this goal? So they examine all the goals and then look at the programs that will be adopted to achieve the given goal. Along that lines, too, in determining the program to be adopted, it is even broken down into specific areas. For example, we want to produce engineers. Engineers is the goal. What do we teach? What do we teach? What will be the course content that will enable us to produce these categories of manpower and order? So at this level, the technical planner breaks these things down into specifics and what is achievable in that order. So the next activity they are engaged in is called, they generate alternative programs. They generate alternative programs and projects upon which the choice made is anchored. So it is here they will have to generate alternative programs like technical and vocational education. What are the programs that will be done in specific area to produce technicians in the various. We need technicians in agriculture, we need technicians in road maintenance, we need technicians in aircraft maintenance and all that areas. So it is here they will be able to decide the project, the specific ones, according to the needs of the society, that is of priority interest, and how to embark on them. Now they translate objectives into clearly defined quantitative achievable goals. They translate objectives. All the objectives set in the national policy are here translated into well-defined qualitative goals, achievable goals. That's part of their responsibility. Then they state clearly and in measurable terms what is to be achieved within a defined period of time. Within a defined period of time, from so time to so time, if we embark on this program, we should be producing so number of medical doctors for the society. From so time to so time, if we embark on this program, we should be able to produce agriculturists that will produce so number in that order. So that's from so time. So if Nigeria now want to embark on, say for example, Nigeria want to begin to produce cars for internal consumption and external here they will be able to determine what are the programs that we will embark on to enable us to produce this kind of manpower for society from so time to so time. So our inability to even make progress is because it appears that nothing is working along the line of educational planning, because the citizens are there, the things to be taught are there, but to plan these things remains a problem, because it is the same human beings in Nigeria that move out to become productive elsewhere. So if here the planners are given the opportunity and things are done rightly, people will be able to determine that from so time to so time we'll have so number of engineers. It's a matter of taxing the institutions. This is what we want. Give them the necessary things that will enable them to produce, and then we'll fire down. We have the manpower, we have the human resources that any country will need to produce whatever I want to produce. So if we plan our education and determine that these human resources will be channeled towards these programs. And in the next 10 years, we want to produce a made in Nigeria car. In the next 10 years, we want to stop the importation of so goods because Nigerians should be able to produce them. That's the job of the technical planners. Alright. They also estimate the resources needed to achieve given educational goals. They are also involved in estimating the resources that will be needed to achieve given educational goals as enunciated in the National Policy on Education. Alright, the national policy will tell us what is achievable for primary education, what is achievable for secondary, what is achievable for tertiary, what is achievable for technical and vocational education, what is achievable for teacher education, and all that. Is it not? That's what they will tell us, and that is where they will end. It is the technical planner that goes down now into specific to tell us that to achieve this in primary education, this is the number of teachers we need, this is the pupil projection, and given the number of people that is estimated to attend school at so time to so time, this is the number of manpower that is needed. So we need this quantity of teachers to be able to achieve this. So they go into estimating in quantitative terms what will be used to achieve the targets in education. So they do what is called projection. They do projection and have estimates of the cost of each of the programs to be implemented. So all the inputs that are needed to achieve those specified goals are determined by the technical planners. They do what is called the costing of the human resources that will be needed in all the areas, in the diverse areas of manpower. They do the costing. They also do the costing of the physical facilities that will be needed to achieve given educational goals. They do all that. They also do the costing of the financial resources that will be needed to achieve given targets. Now, in education, children are admitted into schools. They project the number of students that will be admitted into primary, and the next 6 years, these children will be in secondary school. So they project what is needed to enable them to proceed to secondary school, and then to sustain them at the primary school level. What are the physical facilities? What is the financial cost to keep a child in school? They do all that. Now, when they come up with the financial cost that will be needed to achieve a given educational objective, such proposals are all keyed into the planning process. That enables the budgetary allocations to education. So you see, the job of the technical planner is very, very important in the educational planning process, because he determines the cost, he determines the manpower needs, he determines the physical infrastructure that will be needed in quantitative terms, and all these are used as input, in the planning process. All right. Now, having done all that, the next stage is what is called program choice and implementation. Program choice and implementation. Now, remember, in the last two stages, policy formulation, program generation, and rationalization, two categories of planners were involved: the political class and the technical planner. The political class were involved in policy formulation, while the technical planner was involved in program generation and regeneration. But here, at the point of program choice and implementation, it involves both the technical planner and the administrators. Program choice and implementation. The technical planner and administrators are involved at this point. So the earlier activities are the two foregone stages. What we saw there is what we call each of the individuals that it is their area were involved in the activities there. In educational planning, that is called functional specialization. the educational planner, the technical planner, is involved in his own area that require technical knowledge, expertise. Now the political class is involved in formulating policy. So we call that functional specialization. Everybody is performing his own function in the area of his specialization. So that's one of the principles in educational planning. It's not a one slot activity that one person does. It involves a whole lot of persons who are specialized in their various areas. So each point in the planning process, when they are needed, they are called upon to provide their expertise knowledge. So in policy formulation, the political class does that. In program generation, the technical planners does that. And who are the technical planners? The technical planners are people who are specially trained in educational planning. Like we are trying to produce people now to become. So those are the people that are consulted to perform the technical aspect of the job. Now, in program choice and implementation. Here, because we want to choose and implement the program. So this one, this level, it calls for synergy. So it calls for synergy among the three principal actors in the educational planning process. See, the last two stages involve planners and policy makers. Here now, at the point of program choice and implementation, it calls for what is called synergy among the three principal actors in the educational planning process, namely the policy decision makers, the technical planner, and the educational managers. Here, point of program choice and implementation involves the actions of the policy decision makers, being the political class. 2, the technical planner, being the educational planners. 3, the educational administrators or managers. This combined effort of these three categories of planners helps to reinforce what is called the principle of administrative harmonization. So in the process of educational planning, there's what is called administrative harmonization. That is a harmony between all the sectors, all the areas where educational planning activities take place. It is harmonized to give us an educational plan. So all the activities of the various educational planning activities is now collapsed and harmonized here for implementation. So each of these categories of actors are involved in the program choice and implementation. And what are the basic activities here? The basic activities carried out at this point include to make decisions on the specific programs and projects in terms of choice from alternatives generated by the technical planner. All now will now take a decision on the specific programs and projects to be implemented in terms of the choice made from the alternative generated by the planner. You know, the educational planner will come up with alternatives, several projects. You know, among the several projects, he will list them out. We can do this, we can do that to achieve this, we can do this second option to achieve the same thing, this third one to achieve the same thing. For primary education, we can do this and this to achieve this and this. So all the options are there, provided by the technical planner. So at this point of choice and implementation, it is here now that all these are harmonized, and then the best alternative is taken for implementation as recommended by the technical planner. The second thing they do here, the implementation of the selected program. When they make choice from all the alternatives, they now implement. Now the implementation now is at the point of the administrator. It's the educational administrator that does the implementation. So the job, the bulk of the job now falls to the educational administrator or educational manager. And then who are the people who classify as educational managers or educational administrators? They are the institutional heads. It could be the school principal, it could be the school headmistress or headmaster, it could be the vice chancellor of an institution, the rector, the provost, or what have you, or the heads of the institutional ladies, and the heads of any educational institution, including the ministries, the parastatals. All those people are called educational administrators or educational managers. Their job is to implement the alternative choices that were accepted for implementation. Now the third function, the third task at this area is what is called monitoring of the programs, monitoring of the implementation activities, whether they comply with the guidelines and laid down procedures, whether they comply with. So at the point of monitoring, what is happening here now is to examine whether what the administrator or the managers are implementing, whether they are in line with the laid down procedures, whether they are in line with the provisions of the law or the constitution or the policy. Are they following what was laid down there? Are they doing the correct thing and all that? Now at this point now, when we now examine the educational implementation in Nigeria vis-a-vis the laid down procedure, a lot of issues raises, a lot of fundamental questions are raised. Is our educational policy implementation able to address the issues raised in the national policy? That's a food for thought, and that is where I'm giving you an assignment. That's where I'm giving you an assignment. So write down this. Write down this. Choose any educational program of your choice. Choose any educational program of your choice in Nigeria, whether even early childhood, non-formal, primary, secondary, tertiary. Choose any of your choice, and then examine whether its implementation has followed specified guidelines. Examine whether its implementation has followed specified guidelines. Choose any educational program of your choice. Any educational program of your choice. Program here could be early childhood, it could be non-formal, it could be adult education, it could be primary education, it could be secondary education, it could even be junior or senior secondary education, it could be the tertiary, it could be technical, it could be vocational, any one of your choice, and then examine whether its implementation in Nigeria has followed specified guidelines. That's your assignment. You submit online. Either submit online, I'll forward my email to you, and then when you finish, you submit it to my mail. I'll go through it and then reply you accordingly. Then the last of the planning process is program evaluation and regeneration. Program evaluation and regeneration. Program evaluation and regeneration. The question of how do we know if we have gotten to where we want to be educationally is answered here. It's answered at this point. The question of how do we know if we have arrived or if we have been to the place we want to be educationally is answered here. Remember, 4 questions were asked as a guide. So at this point in program evaluation and regeneration, that question is answered. Here, which people perform this function? They are performed by the educational managers, the topmost educational managers in the form of the ministry. At the state level, the Ministry of Education, and the federal Ministry of Education, and each of these ministries have their specialized agencies that they use in monitoring. So if you go to the Ministry of Education now, there's a unit, an office they call the monitoring unit. The monitoring unit, they are involved in checking whether the programs as laid down in the policy is being implemented. What is the major tasks here? The major basic tasks involved include: 1. A comparison of actual performance of the education system against expected performance. 1. A comparison of the actual performance of the education system against expected performance. The performance, what is on ground, what we are seeing that is being done, is it what was expected in the laid down? Is this thing we are seeing, is it what was expected? For example, now, and they say every child of primary education at the point of completion should be able to read and write. Should be able to read and write. Have all the primary school leavers been able to read and write? The primary school leavers, have they been able to read and write? Now, this question can best be answered when you examine those who are even living, who are concluding their secondary education. I'm not talking about primary now. Can they be able to read and write? Some of the graduates of secondary school system, at the point of collecting their original certificate, cannot write original copy received by me. Original copy received by me. So what does it tell us about the graduates of primary education system? When somebody who finished from primary, proceeded to secondary school, at the point of completion cannot write original copy received by me, what does it tell of our primary school system? The actual performance against the expected performance. That's what we do in evaluation. Have we been able to achieve the laid down objective as we expected it? You know, there is this story we were told about a graduate from university who had applied for a bank job. At the point of employment, they had asked her to write an application. You know, simple application of desiring to do that job and all that, experiences and all that. She couldn't write. She couldn't write anything. She couldn't. What does that tell us about the programs? When a university graduate cannot write a simple application, what does it tell us about the attainment of the objective of the university education? You know, it becomes a problem. It becomes a problem. So that's what program evaluation and regeneration does. The actual against the expected performance. Then evaluation here involves two major forms. What is called the formative evaluation and summative evaluation. Formative evaluation and summative evaluation. Formative evaluation is carried out during the implementation process. During the process of implementation, and involves activities like monitoring the progress. Yes, are we on course? Have we started? Where have we reached? Which level are we? And all that. That's formative, to know whether the program have actually commenced and the level of speed it is, the momentum is carrying, and all that. All that is done at the formative level. You know. So at that point, if it stops moving with the momentum it ought to, they will begin to fine-tune and make sure that it catches up and begin to move in the right direction by introducing necessary changes and ensure that goals and targets at each point is met in accordance. You know, this at the early stage, monitoring activities involve this action. They make adjustments where necessary to ensure that, you know, the target is being achieved. Then the summative evaluations, that's the carried out at the end to determine the level of achievement attained in the implementation of planned programs. It is done to determine the level of achievement in attaining the implementation of planned program in meeting the expected goals. For example, the tertiary institutions should produce manpower that should be able to do this and that. Should be able to do this and that in the society. What have we been able to produce? What have the system been able to produce? Do we have manpower that can be able to address our economic problems? Do we have enough medical doctors to take care of the medical health sector? Are we able to produce made in Nigerian goods that will service the economy? Are we able to address all the fundamental issues raised in the national policies which education ought to achieve? This is what we do. This is what is done at the summative evaluation end, to identify the basic areas of strength and weakness in the implementation process. What are our areas of strength? What are areas of weakness? Do we have enough manpower? Do we have enough equipment? The facilities, are they there? Are we able to procure enough facility? The cost of education, were we able to meet it? The funding and all that, were we able to release enough funds? Were funds there? What is the student teacher ratio? Have we been able to achieve it? The literacy rate, has it been able to achieve, and all that? What is the educational standard when compared to others? The quality of education given and all that. So all these are evaluated at this point to examine whether we are making progress. To review the reasons for the failures and success. We succeeded in this area. What were the reasons? We failed here. What were the reasons? All this articulated. You know, when all this articulated, it is now put back as an input in the next planning process. So it also reveals the level of effectiveness and efficiency of the process of implementation. How effective is the process? How efficient is the process in achieving the planned target? We had estimated, or we had planned that by a given period of time, this should be achieved. Were we able to achieve it within that time? Were we effective in doing that? Was it well efficient and all that? All these are things that we measure at the point of evaluation. So it helps to provide the true performance pictures of the entire education planning process. It gives us the correct picture of the entire planning process, where we are. So you see, from the beginning of the planning process, those fundamental questions that were asked, as the process continues, they have been addressed till the end, where we now know where we are, whether we have gotten to where we want to get to using education. So the outcome of the evaluation process serves as an input into the new planning process, and then the process begins again. It's just like a circle. A circle, it doesn't have an end. It doesn't have an end. It begins from the first point, continue to the last point of evaluation, and continue from the first point again. So it's just a circle. So that is why we have several editions of the National Policy on Education, because the planning process keep rotating, keep moving. When there are new changes, lapses observed, corrections are planned for and put back into the planning process, and then the entire thing continues. So these are the processes involved in the educational planning process. And take note, like I said earlier, the planning process is not a one straight-jacket activity. It involves the actions of several number of persons. Three major stakeholders: the political class, the technical planner, and then the educational administrator or the manager. All of them are involved. And when this is done, it helps us to achieve what the principle of harmonization in the educational planning process. Even though the principle of harmonization is upheld or followed, it does not also exclude the principle of functional specialization. At each point of the planning process, people with specialized skills are also called up to perform their jobs at various stages. So all this combined to make up the educational planning process. On this note, we'll be ending our first class. Like I told us from the beginning, please, coronavirus is real. Stay safe. Stay at home. Use hand sanitizers. The new situation now have taught us to wash our hands regularly. Wash your hands regularly. If you cannot get sanitizers available, wash your hands regularly. It is recommended that 20 minutes time you wash your hand. Every 20 minutes time you wash your hand. Wash them regularly. Observe social distancing. Your friends, if you remain alive, you will see with your friends when the whole pandemic is over. You can hug and do all that again. But for now, maintain social distancing. Keep yourself safe. Keep your children safe. Keep your entire family safe. God bless you all.